Hi, my name's Kate Mason and I am part of Community Voice Australia Central Coast, and I have two beekeepers here to talk to about a strip that was being put into hives in the purple zones. So I'm going to hand over to you both to introduce yourselves.
Yeah, sure. Well, my name's Steve Kieran. I'm also used to be known as Stevie K on one of the local community radio stations. I used to do a broadcast called What's the Buzz on Bees? And so I'm deeply concerned with our bees and what's going on with them right now. And
I'm Kate, Steve's daughter. So I host some of his beehives in my food forest in Budgewoi.
yeah, well, I was contacted by the DPI and I thought it was the big phone call to come and destroy my hives, because I know of many hives that have been destroyed in the areas around the place. And but after a bit of an introduction, I'll cut a lot of this short because it goes on and on and on, as you can imagine. I said, well, what can I do for you? And she said, well, you've got 2 hives at Narungga Avenue. And I said, no, I've got 9 hives at that time. And she said, but you only have 2 registered. I said, well, yeah, with all that's been going on, I said, I've had several swarms that I've collected of my own. And I said, I've also tested my hives for Varroa mite. And there is no Varroa in mine. I've been sugar shaking them. I've done 1 alcohol test, and I said I didn't like doing that, but no, there's no Varroa. She said, so with regard to the Varroa mite, can you help us out? She said, we're concerned that there's a leakage from the red zone into the purple zone. And I said, so how can I help you? She said, well, what we want to do is we want to put some strips into your hives, into your brood box, and some sticky paper in the bottom, and test your hives for Varroa. And she said that the Varroa will die and drop onto the sticky mats. We can check. And I said, well, what about the sugar shack? She said, this is more accurate. It's over 3 days. And I said, will it hurt my hives? Will it hurt my hives in any way? No, it won't. It's only for 3 days. And being the DPI, being the authority, and being often is the case, beekeepers themselves, I didn't question it. And it was pretty stupid of me. Because I not only volunteered my hives, but I volunteered. I said, well, in the purple zone, we've also got some hives down here in Halakalani, and also another one down here in Budgewoi, more down in Budgewoi. She said, well, send all that through to me and we'll choose which hives we want to hit. Well, they decided to hit mine, Kate's, and Shane Shepherd's, another guy, a friend of mine. And so they came out. And the point here is that I did clarify, is it going to damage the hives in any way? No, it's not. And anyway, they came out. The team that came out were professional, were beekeepers like me. And I attended with them, and they went down, they put their strips into the brood box. And at the end of the day, after 3 days, they came back and they took it back. And they took them back out. And I proceeded to just attend my hives. But then the president of my local club, I rang him just to let him know that this had been done, that I was helping out the DPI. And he said, you are aware you can't sell your wax, you know. He said, or at least you can't sell it as an edible. I said, no. I said, there's no damage to the hives at all. And he said, well, no, you can't sell your wax, Steve. So I checked it with the DPI, and apparently you can't eat the wax, which makes me think if you're going to sell it as wax for candles, you can't burn it either. And I thought, well, what about the honey? And I was told by, again, cutting a long story short, after I then looked up on the internet and checked out what this product was, and I engaged Kate's help, and she got in and started making phone calls, etc. as well. We identified this as a very serious poison. And I mean, let's face it, logic prevailing, if it's in the wax, it's more than likely in the honey as well. After I rang the DPI a few times, I said, well, look, I've got some free tests for my honey and wax that I've never used. And I said, I'd like to use them to have the wax and honey tested for this poison. Oh, she said, it's only 3 days. I said, yeah, sure. But I said, you know, I want it tested. I'm not going to sell honey and wax that could be poisoned.
What's 3 days? 3 days the strips were in?
Yes.
3 days only. And so, again, long story short, I have spoken to other people in the DPI. I did say to this particular lady, I said, how come it's in the wax but not in the honey? And she said to me, oh, the wax is oil-based, but the honey is water-based, so it doesn't stay in the honey, it only goes in the wax. And I thought, no, that's not right either. I spoke to a friend of mine who's in the DPI. And candidly, he said, no, that's completely wrong. He said, I can't imagine who told you that. He said they're all composed from bee enzymes, etc. He said if it's in the wax, it's probably in the honey as well. Anyhow, Katie followed up me. I rang the labs and got the runaround. Stephanie will call you back, I was told. Never got the phone call.
Weeks and weeks.
That was before Christmas. I still hadn't heard anything in January. And Kate took over and shared with it with
I was basically just call this number, call that number, typical runaround for about 6 to 8 weeks. And then we finally got a lead through Dad, and it was basically you've got to send your samples to Germany at about $400 a sample. And per hive, that's just ridiculous. It's particularly when it's being used under emergency authorisation. It's on the DPI website. You can look the document up. It's an untested product. If you read what they've done overseas with this FLUMETHRIN, it's never put in at harvest time. These were put in at spring, just before our largest harvest, which is when you do not put these strips in. They do tend to put the strips in for a longer duration. So I'm assuming here they've gone, oh, we'll just put them in for 3 days. That should be okay. But we should still be testing our honey to make sure that, considering the fact they haven't tested it, to make sure that there's no residues left in our hives. And obviously the easiest way, or the only way that they can provide that service for us is at $400 a sample in Germany.
So we definitely got a runaround till I finally got on. I think her name was Jessie. And she said to me, look, I have got some links for you. She didn't say they were in Germany. She said, I've got a couple of links for you and I'll shoot those out to you. And so that'd be great. And I got them and I flippantly read them on one particular day. And I finally went back and I told Kate, I've got some links here. And I looked at them, Dresden, Germany. And I thought, what's wrong with Sydney University, CSIRO, Gibson Chemicals? I mean, there's got to be labs all over Sydney, for God's sake. But anyway, let alone the labs that we normally use to test our honey. And the upshot of all that was, somewhere in the middle of all this, I said, look, it says here that we can, I can have a free test. She said, no, you're not entitled to a free test for this. She said, it's going to cost you $70 at that point in time. This is somewhere back in the middle of the negotiations. Kate followed that up and said, look, we both suffer with MTHFR, my dad and I, and we're going to be very careful what we eat and put in our bodies. We're certainly not going to pass on wax and honey that could be poisonous to people. And as a result, our harvest from spring is still sitting in the garage in buckets, and we have not let it go, and we will not, because that's not our style, until we are absolutely confident the honey and wax is good.
And we don't even know if this biodegrades, how long this is going to stay in the hives, whether our bees now have that and they're carrying it throughout my food forest. I've got no idea. There's absolutely no information.
And the very important thing for beekeepers that watch this is the fact is they'll know exactly what I'm talking about. If it's in your brood box, you can't get rid of it. And we don't know what the half-life is. We don't know how long it's going to be in there. So even if I take out 3 frames from the brood box, which you probably normally wouldn't do, and replace it with brand new wax foundations, we've got to give the bees time to replenish those frames before we take any more out, because they've got to put new brood in, new honey, new pollen, etc., etc. And by the time you've waited to take the next 3 out to try and get it out of your hives, the bees that are contaminated with this stuff have repopulated the 3 brand new foundations. So the only way, I mean, if this half-life is 2 or 3 years, you basically got to kill your hive, from my perspective, unless we find out. And we can't find out what the half-life is until we have our honey and wax tested. And we can't get that tested. They come back with an insult and say, Dresden, Germany? This is Australia. We've got our own labs. This is insane.
It's like they don't really want us.
They don't want us to test it.
Most people wouldn't be bothered, and they would just consume their honey,
Yeah.
Oh, it should be fine.
Yeah. So who makes the strips?
They're called Bayvarol Strips. I believe it's from Bayer. Yeah.
And you've only found this out because of you just keeping on asking the Department of Primary Industries. There's been nothing forthcoming from them if you hadn't asked the questions.
It was more an afterthought. These strips went in and I was just like, if it kills mites, it's got to be some sort of chemical. So I just looked into it, and that's what started everything happening, is just asking the question, realizing that people didn't really have any answers. And when it started taking 6 to 8 weeks, and the DPI saying you shouldn't be selling anything or consuming it.
Did they say that, or they just said that about the wax? Don't eat the wax. What
No,
did
they said to me, my president said to me,
Yeah.
Steve, you can't see your wax, don't you?
that was your president?
That was my insight into it. Then
Yeah.
I contacted the DPI and I said, oh no, you can't see your wax. I said, you guys did not tell me that.
Yeah.
They said, well, you should have been given a piece of paper with all that information on it. I said, to be honest with you, we were donating temporary netting for our faces and temporary gear that the DPI provided. I went down and assisted the beekeeper. I basically watched, because the two people that came out were extreme, or three people that came out, one was the team leader, the other two were very competent beekeepers, far more competent than me. And I was learning stuff from them as we were talking, and I was watching them. And I assisted them where I could, which was not very little, but I watched what they were doing. And they didn't tag all my hives. They selected the ones with supers. And I had a few broods I'd collected, a couple of swarms that I'd collected just in swarm nukes, you know, and they didn't touch them, but they did hit the ones with supers on it, because they were the ones they were interested in.
I'll just interrupt. Some of those links I sent you earlier, if you read them, some of them actually state to not put those strips in if the supers are on.
Okay.
And that they've actually picked the ones, so definitely not at harvest time, not with supers, and they've actually done it at harvest time.
And picked
with
the supers, definitely. They did not do the ones that were single, and they did not do the swarm boxes, the nukes I had. So, so when I said to the woman, well, no, I says, I don't recall getting a sheet of paper. I said, I asked the DPI, will this hurt my, so, you know, and we don't need to get into legal aspects. You trust, in a beekeeping world, we trust one another. You know, we know what we know, and we trust one another, and we seek advice from one another. And these guys, the lady and the man that came in were wonderful people, and the guy who led the team were awesome. And when it came down to, I got a phone call again a few weeks later after all this, and I was told, she said, I want to come back out and do, apparently you've got hives out at Moore Head. I said, yes, I have. And I said, no, we won't be doing that. She said, what do you mean? I said, well, no, not after what I have found out about the poison that you're putting in the hives. I said, I'm not happy. She said, what do you mean? I told her a brief overview of where I'm at. And she said, and I said, so it's not going back into any more of my hives. I said, it's that simple. And she said, well, actually, you haven't got the choice of doing that. I said, what do you mean I've got the choice? She said, well, we have an emergency order covering that now. And she said, you must. It's a mandated thing. I said, you're not going to get them into my hives, no more. And
they haven't showed up to do.
No, well, she said to me, look, well, I'll give you until next Tuesday, but then we're going to have to come out and do the hives. I said, well, I'll see you out at the hives next Tuesday. I said, it's not going to happen. And,
so the emergency order is now lifted. When did the emergency order go from?
Emergency 28th of July 22 to 30 November.
Okay. And do you think everyone in the purple zone was done with the strips?
Oh, yeah.
Because so you accepted the strips prior to it being mandatory, is that right?
No, this was in November when they came to us. It would have been just before Christmas. Yep. So we would have been in that time frame.
Yep. So you had to do it. There was no choice with doing it.
Whereas when they've approached Dad to do Joel's hives and Dad said no, we weren't aware. But now after reading that, it wasn't actually during that period, which is maybe why they haven't showed up. But they didn't inform Dad that either. If he hadn't stood up to them, they probably would have showed up.
Yeah. And why Germany? Did they give any reason why you have to send it overseas and it costs $400 when it was under their direction to do it in the first place?
Well, I spoke to the labs direct for DPI and they said, we just don't have the technical abilities to look for that chemical.
That's insane. This is
look,
Australia.
I'm not a physicist. I don't know that sort of stuff, but it just seems kind of mind-blowing.
Well, it seems mind-blowing that they aren't giving the information around how long it stays active for, and then you have to pay, even though it's under an emergency order, then you don't get any clear information, and then it's just off your own concern. Then you've got to pay $400.
And it's so conflicting. You've got DPI people saying just in the wax, and then another person from the DPI saying, well, whatever's in the wax is in the honey because it's from the same,
Same enzymes.
enzymes from the
yeah,
bees.
Yeah.
So it's just, you don't even have them all telling the same story. So you're not sure.
And all you ever get when you inquire is, oh, look, Steve, you've got no idea the quality of the experts that are involved in this. You just wouldn't believe. And I said, well, yeah, I don't believe, because I haven't heard any names. I haven't heard anyone, any expert classified. And when you go online, and at one point that was made to me that was very clear and very commonsensical, in my opinion, was the difference between Canada and Australia, for example. They deal with the Varroa mite all the time, and they have a wintering period where the temperature drops to 40 degrees below. And in that time, they feed the hives by putting inserting a tank into the hives. They feed them, and they put a Varroa, they squeeze a Varroa substance, anti-Varroa substance, into the hive, which the bees eat, and it kills off the Varroa. Now, whether that's organic or a horrible poison, I've got no idea. I don't deal with that. But because they've got the bees contained inside the hive for the whole winter period, they can kill off the Varroa. But then they go back out in spring and they start doing it all over again, and they pick up 1 and 2 Varroa and all that sort of stuff again, and it's the cycle starts. Here in Australia, we don't have a specific season. Our bees are out collecting pollen and making honey all year round. More so in summer, of course, but in winter, they're still out there doing it. So this fellow from the DPI, who I won't name, he said to me, Steve, the problem with the Varroa for us, if the summer, with our seasons being the way that's being a continuous season, once the Varroa establish themselves, it's going to go through the roof, and we're going to have to be poisoning our hives to kill them off. But the thing that surprises me is the fact that when I set my hives up again, and I've got to know if I'm going to keep them or not, even though I'm going to fight that, I want to set my yard up, and I'm going to put out there around the hives anti-Varroa plants all around and I'm going to put them in the middle of the garden. Now, yes, the bees go out 10 kilometres to feed, but some of them will go and feed from the plants around the hive, and they'll take that into the hive and make it very unattractive for Varroas. Now, for Varroa mite, I spoke to my DPI representative that I know very well. I said, surely someone's doing stuff in this area to kill off the beast, you know? He said, I've never heard of anyone doing anything like that. I said, not even overseas?
Yeah.
And I said, surely someone's done this before, and it's got to work. If it's an anti-Varroa mite plants and herbs, and there's plenty of them out there, you can situate hive. This is just an idea, because I don't want to give in to putting poisons in my hives. I want an organic treatment, you know?
There's Paul Stammons, the guy that researches all the fungi. He's even spoken recently about funguses that totally deter Varroa mite. There's a lot of stuff online from Europe where people obviously deal with it, and they talk about rhubarb and all these plants that deter the Varroa mite. And I just don't know why, like, you know, if you find out your hive's clean like ours were, why we aren't given these organic alternatives while we're in the clear. Sure, if we show up to have Varroa mite, you know, I'm not going to push too much there because I don't want to be a part of the problem. But there's just no information on how we can do other things.
The thousands of beekeepers out there that will probably listen to this broadcast is that have had their hives destroyed and they never had any Varroa in it. Mm. That seems insane. And I'm talking about some people that their livelihoods were based on it, and they've had thousands of hives poisoned with this petrol. You know, they put the petrol on the rag and wipe out the hive. Family businesses have gone under and they haven't got Varroa in the hive. I know of one couple where I buy all my bee supplies from. They've lost all of their hives and they never had Varroa. What's going on? This is insane.
And it did state in the emergency order that organic farmers were allowed to be, basically the DPI could use their discretion based on the situation. Now, we're definitely organic, and we were quite literally told there was no option.
And how many months has it been from when you first had the strips in to where you've had like the final bit of information about send it off to Germany?
It took about 2 months to get that final answer from the initial inquiry. Yep. And the thing is, like, we would send a batch off of the honey we haven't consumed yet just to see what happened initially. But then we'd have to do it again now to see where our hives are at. But you've got to do consecutive testing. You've got 2 or 3 hives, $400 a sample. It's not achievable at all, especially when we're talking to people who have lost their businesses, and it's crazy.
There's a peer pressure associated with this. Yeah. Don't be a part of the problem. We've got to kill this Varroa mite. And if the Varroa mite is as serious a problem as they believe, and I do believe my friend in the DPI who told me what he told me, he said, Steve, if these get out of control, our honey's never going to be superior quality ever again. But then again, I'm hearing other people like Kate are coming back and saying there are organic treatments, there are fungi and things like that can be used. Why isn't this coming out? There are solutions to this problem that are not being talked about. All they're talking about is let's kill the bees.
And it's getting more and more, toxic. Let's now kill, put fipronil traps out and kill native bees, and then kill and that kills.
Well, let's spray the atmosphere and wipe out all the native bees and all the insects. There's already, I mean, I don't know how much research has been done in the area, but there are people now that are, well, I think it's a reasonable test. You go for a drive from here to Dubbo and back and check out how many insects get squashed on your screen. None. It does. I mean, I just did it. None. Not one. Yeah. Whereas before, when you go driving in the country, you'd have grasshoppers and all sorts of stuff being splashed on your windscreen. Now, I know that's not a real scientific test. It's just an indicator.
It's an observation. Yeah.
But I think a very good one.
We watch the monarch butterflies in our food forest, and every year we get multiple cycles from September. And it could be a La Nina thing or whatever, but we have observed that 3 years ago was when the season started. The following year it started in December. Still had a couple of cycles. This year it's just started as of February. And because all the milkweed is dying off, which is what they eat, the monarch butterflies are laying their eggs, but the caterpillars aren't thriving. We used to see the chrysalises everywhere. Like my boys used to go around and take photos because they look like little jade crystals. And this year we've had 2 in total. And that's like, we used to get maybe, 50 to 80 a year.
Yeah.
So it's a massive reduction.
Yep. There's a lot of poisoning going on. Thank you. Is there anything else? Do you think we've covered everything?
That's pretty much everything. We'll provide an update if we get anywhere. If anyone sees this and they're like, we can test, that would be fantastic. We are reaching out to students in universities and stuff to see if there's anything we can do. And when and if we find that, we'd obviously put the word out.
I think another aspect to all this too is I know how it's impacted me. I've only been doing bees for maybe 3 years or so, and there are other situations within my life. I'm caring for a dementia wife, and there's a lot of other stuff going on in my family at the moment, which is making my caring for my bees challenging. But the difficulty I have right now is my motivation is just not there, because I don't know. I could get a phone call next week from the DPI and say, Steve, sorry, mate, we're coming down to kill your bees. Now, this is a government body, and while I might be able to take them on, I might try and champion the cause, whether or not I'm going to be successful or not, whether I've got the time to fight this, because it's big government coming down on little Steve, I don't know whether I'm going to be able to do that, and I don't even know whether I'm going to keep my bees. Yeah. So whereas I could sort of plan my backyard, set up the landscaping, complement it with all the right herbs and shrubs to kill off the Varroa, and then get a phone call to say, well, thanks for doing that, Steve. We're coming down, we're going to poison your hives and kill them off. And I'm afraid that's very demotivating. It is for me, and I'm sure there are other people out there that feel just like me.
I'm sure we got in touch with you because of your video that you posted of that I can't remember his name, but he gave so much amazing information on how you can control this Varroa mite and how bees can actually build up an immunity to these things. And I just think, well, if he knows all of this, why isn't this getting out? It just doesn't make any sense.
I don't think I'd be the only beekeeper, and Kate and Shane, that have not sold their honey and their wax, because beekeepers are pretty on the up and up when it comes to the quality of their honey.
Yeah,
we're not 2 bob operations. I mean, it can be expensive working with the bees and bringing the honey about, but we're legitimate in keeping the honey good quality, because we don't want any comebacks on us. And there's no way in the world I'd let any of this honey out not knowing the quality of it. We need to test our honey and wax.
When my 4-year-old's sick, the first thing I do is give him a teaspoon of honey if he's got a sore throat. Now I won't touch my honey.
And the other thing is now is with the hives that have been tested is the fact I need to know from the testing whether my hives are clear, because once I find out that this poison's there from the testing, and I find out that the half-life, I don't know, the half-life could be 10 years. Well, I may as well put the hive down.
Yeah.
As much as that would break my heart, I may as well, because I can't get rid of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Clean all the frames, strip them down, whack them in the oven, put them in the fridge, freeze them up, and then maybe hopefully be able to refoundation them and start the hive off anew with a swarm from my hives. That's what I'm going to have to do if I can have them tested. But right now I'm stalemated. I don't know what to do. And
yeah, so Dolphy Benesh was the beekeeper at Jillaby who lost his hives, and then he says as well, who knows, it's for the next 3 years, it could be another 3 years after that. So, you know, it has destroyed his honey business. So yes, and Save the Bees Australia is talking out about it and trying to do something. So hopefully some other beekeepers will hear this in the area, and you know, we're setting up, Community Voice is setting up a working group around it. So this is it's good that there's a bit of momentum and people are starting to come out and talk about it.
6 o'clock.
Yeah, but thank you so much for your time, and thank you for your input and getting in touch.
No, thank you.
my pleasure. Good luck with the program you're running too. Well done.